Thank you very much for coming along this afternoon to the Amazon Web Services Public Sector session. My name's Craig Fox. A couple of things about myself before we start this afternoon. My role is to work with Amazon Web Services as a Cloud Executive Advisor. And what that means is I work with people like yourselves who are working in public sector government organisations to help you understand what it takes to move to the cloud and to try to provide as much help as I can for you to make that move to the cloud. And I've been doing that job with Amazon Web Services now for about 6 months. Before that, and it's up on the board for you, I was a Deputy Commissioner of the Australian Taxation Office for 35 years. So I'm clearly much older than what I look. Okay, the translation's working well. This is going good. And one of the last jobs that I had with the Australian Taxation Office was to help the Australian Taxation Office move to cloud on AWS. So what I want to do this afternoon for the next 15 or 20 minutes is talk to you a little bit as builders in public service agencies in Korea who are trying to make a decision about what to do about cloud. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what the Amazon Web Services experience is about that. And I'll also talk to you about what it was like for the Australian Taxation Office to make that move. Okay, in terms of the agenda for this afternoon's session, I wanted to cover a little bit about the business drivers for cloud. So my question that I'll work my way through with you is, why do you need to move to cloud if you are a public sector agency or a public sector government department? Why do you need to move to cloud? I'll then talk about the importance of setting a vision or some guidelines, or if you like, a future direction for where you think your organisation wants to move to. I'll talk a little bit about taking some action. It's often easy to talk about what to do to cloud. I want to give you some examples of some things that you can do as builders and leaders to help make that move towards cloud. I'll then talk about some very practical examples of what the Australian Taxation Office was able to do with cloud over a 4 or 5 year journey. And then I'll give you some key learnings, some key insights, some of the experiences that I have which I can pass on to you, which might help you over the next 3 or 4 years. Okay? And before I go to the next slide, about 4 or 5 years ago, I sat almost in the same kind of chair. It wasn't in Korea, it would have been in Australia. And I would have sat at a conference like this and somebody would have started talking to me about cloud. And the reason why 4 or 5 years ago I went to a presentation like this is because as a government employee working in a government IT department, I wanted to find out more about cloud because I knew that things had to change. I'm highlighting the fact that I've sat where you have sat and that it was 3 or 4 years ago because I understand this is not easy. It takes time to work through the move towards cloud. And the last 2 presentations have been fantastic in starting to put up on the screen for you some of the challenges that people had to work through. Those challenges are very consistent. There are numbers of customers that we work with that have worked through those challenges. So what we want to do this afternoon is to help you get a sense of how we can help you make that journey. Business drivers for cloud. Peter Moore gave a very good presentation about what cloud is and some of the benefits about moving to cloud. I wanted to talk a little bit about, if you're working in a government department, what problem are you trying to fix? When I worked at the Australian Taxation Office, we had one problem and one problem only that we were trying to fix. We were trying to save money. So first and foremost, it's always a good reason to do anything, is to try to save money. So the first move to cloud, and we still see this with a lot of customers now, is a recognition that there are some cost savings and some economic benefits that you can get by making the move to cloud. Peter gave a great example earlier about the Notre Dame University who saved some money on infrastructure costs. We still see from an AWS perspective, cost is an important reason to start to think about cloud. But there are other business drivers that I think, particularly over the last 1 to 2 years, are becoming more important than just worrying about trying to save money. Saving money is important, but there are other drivers. I think what we are now starting to see, particularly from people like ourselves who are members of a community who live and work in a country, we are seeing an increasing demand from our governments for services to help us do our jobs and to live our lives. And we want those services quickly, we want those services with speed, and we want those services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year. So we are now starting to see, particularly across the public sector landscape, emerging drivers around wanting to have services that are highly available, responsive to the needs of their citizens, and have the ability to adapt as those citizen circumstances change. Still very focused on trying to save money, but a recognition that as we start to think about the services that people need, we are going to need to change the way in which our IT platforms are built to be able to meet that need. In addition to that, the most important driver coming forward now that we are seeing with many customers is around innovation. What we did yesterday was good enough for yesterday. If we start to think about the services that we want to have, not necessarily for the next 5 to 10 years, but think about the next 1 year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, I think we are all challenged as government employees to think about how can we change the way in which we operate so that we can meet that need. I think one of the things that you need to start to consider is if you've got some of these business drivers in your organisation, cloud can help you do that. And it's a really good thing to have a conversation about inside your organisation about what business problem you're trying to solve. Now, this is a diagram that I have borrowed from the Australian Taxation Office. This diagram is about 5 years old. There was a really good diagram in the previous presentation that talked about the way in which the Education Institute had set up their cloud environment. Just a couple of points. This is meant to be illustrative. It's not an AWS diagram. It is 3 or 4 years old right now, and it's very much from the Australian Taxation Office. It's publicly available, so if you want to get a copy of that, you can. My reason for wanting to put this up this afternoon is it is important to have a vision about how you want to go forward. And the one point that I wanted to make about this vision was the Australian Taxation Office managed its own 2 data centres. It had a significant amount of on-premise infrastructure. What this diagram said to everybody who worked inside the Australian Taxation Office and to all the partners that worked with the Australian Taxation Office and also to the staff that worked inside the tax office was cloud was part of our future. I think it's important if you are sitting here thinking, what does my organisation need to do about cloud, to start to think about your vision from the point of view of what is it that I'm trying to change. The one action that we started with was a recognition, and it's captured in this diagram, of going forward with cloud. We were very clear that Amazon Web Services were part of that future. But if you're thinking about first steps to moving towards cloud, taking the time to have a conversation or a discussion in your organisation that sets a very clear direction about including cloud as part of the way in which you want to go forward is a really good first step. Now, actions speak louder than words. And one of the points I wanted to get across this afternoon was, if you're, again, I'm going to keep using the same points, if you're sitting here thinking, I want to do something about cloud, but I'm not sure about what to do, you might be surprised to know there are lots of things that you can start doing from today. You don't necessarily have to think about, how do I get all the way into cloud tomorrow? You can start by taking some practical steps. There are a couple of things here that I wanted to highlight, and they came through in the previous presentation. It's important to pick a cloud provider and then to start to build a commercial relationship with that cloud provider, to build connectivity from an IT perspective with that cloud provider, and also to start to think about some potential workloads in your organisation that you might want to test on cloud. We see a lot of our customers focus on development and test workloads. We see a lot of our customers focus on non-mission critical applications first. Something, if you like, with low risk. It's a great place to get started. And what it will do is it will help you and your teams and your organisation start to learn about cloud. You've also see there I've got a term called a Cloud Centre of Excellence. It's like a cloud team in your own organisation. you can start to bring some people together that work inside your organisation who are keen to understand about cloud. Bring those people together, give them the opportunity to review your infrastructure, give them an opportunity to review your network, your security, to think about which workloads could start to make a migration to cloud, and start to run some tests, start to run some proof of concepts, run some pilots. These are things that so many customers around the world have done before, and there's been an incredible amount of success of people who have run these kinds of pilots, and it's a really good place for public sector departments to start and to learn and to build confidence and to start to see whether your key business drivers are being realised by the move to cloud. I don't want you to think this afternoon that the journey is so hard that you don't know where to start. There are lots of really good places to start your cloud journey, and identifying a low-risk workload that is suitable to cloud and then moving that over in a pilot approach is a really good way to learn. Now, I talked before about the fact that I was at a conference like this 3 or 4 years ago, and I first started doing some work with the Australian Taxation Office to move to cloud. I wanted to again show you, this is a diagram from the Tax Office. This is not an AWS diagram, but I want to talk a little bit about where you can get to with respect to your cloud program. On the left-hand side is a screenshot of the Australian Taxation Office's government website. If you go to lodge your tax return on 30 June or the 1st of July in Australia, you can go and log on to a website. It's called ato.gov.au, and you can look up some information about taxation. And it's got a wealth of information there. And there has about 20 million people in Australia who at some point of time will log onto that website to get some taxation information. On the right-hand side is a very poor description of a smartphone. I'm sure it's a Samsung, but it might be an Apple. And on that smartphone is the ability for you to be able to lodge your tax return electronically. So in Australia now, we can open up our smartphone, download the Australian Taxation Office application, and then from there, key in some information and lodge our returns electronically. This is all done on AWS. All electronic, all available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If there are changes that we want to make to the government website, the Australian Taxation Office can do those immediately. If there is a high demand for the ability to be able to lodge using smartphones at 12:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning, you have the ability to be able to do that. All of this now runs in cloud. As you can imagine, the tax office had to think about infrastructure, it had to think about data security, it had to think about privacy, it had to think of a whole range of issues that right here, right now, might seem difficult or challenging. But what you do know from working with customers like the tax office is there is a way to go forward and to have these services available through cloud. And what you also see now is that these services run cheaper, they run more often, they run more reliable, and they're certainly providing a better citizen experience. It's an example of what can be achieved in the public sector space through cloud. A couple of key points for me, if you like, a bit about key learnings and key insights. I'm going to do these a little bit in a different order. The first of those is it's really important to start running some pilots and learn as you go, which is the second point. I talked a bit about that before. You don't need to do everything at once. You can go forward by picking 1 or 2 workloads and then starting to run some pilots that enable you to learn. The second thing that's come forward, second key lesson for me is, and I've seen this in the last 6 months since I joined Amazon Web Services, but I've seen this in the Australian landscape for the best part of 2 or 3 years now. If you're working in the federal government space, the demand for government services is only going to increase. We all have expectations now that if we deal with government, we expect to be able to deal once, we expect that services to be integrated, and we expect those services to be digital. So we're seeing a really strong demand for an increase from communities across a number of different countries for their governments to provide them services that are more integrated and more connected. We also see that it's very, very important to have really strong leadership. And part of having really strong leadership is having people like yourselves come along to a summit session this afternoon to start the journey on being a cloud builder and to start to learn about not only about what cloud is, but how cloud can help. All of these things are really important. I see a lot of customers who maybe once 2 or 3 years ago wanted to understand what cloud was and would have talked a little bit about why they didn't need to go to cloud. What we are now clearly seeing across a number of different customers is everybody is focused on how they get to cloud. Cloud is going to be a part of your future. It's important to show leadership and to start to take that forward. I wanted to kind of finish a little bit with, I guess, a conversation around, so what would I do next? What would be the last piece of advice that I could give you in terms of going forward? I was once a very, very strong and a very, very loyal customer of Amazon Web Services, and now I've joined Amazon Web Services and I get the really good fortune of working with other customers. If there's one thing that I learned over the last 2 or 3 years, both as a customer and now as someone who works with customers on cloud, is that you are all builders. It's all a really good journey on the way to having cloud help your businesses go forward. But the one thing that I have learned is all of us at AWS are here to help. So if you're sitting here this afternoon and you're a leader in your government department and you want to do something about cloud and you want to make a difference, I wanted to leave you with a very clear message that all of us at AWS are here to help. There are lots of customers who have done what you are looking to do, and we can help bring that together. I want to say thank you very much for having me. I've been in your beautiful country since Tuesday. It's been a very, 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 very enjoyable experience, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your conference. Thank you very much.